Hey folks, how's it going? You're watching Off Grid 406 and my name is Kerry Martin. Anyways, I wanted to talk about something I feel that is really important in today's society. I wanted to talk about um, using solar in town or within the city limits or within the county limits. I'm not talking necessarily grid tie, but I'm talking like an emergency power supply. Um, and the reason why I want to talk about that may be obvious to some, may not be so obvious to others, but if you look around the world, especially, California, last year had some, and the year prior they had all those big outages, the big PG&E outages, and there was quite a few folks who suffered from there. And of course, this recent disaster we had in Texas, where they had the real cold weather, and which was almost laughable to me because the weather they were experiencing down there. See, I live in Montana, and that's like a spring. We get that weather on a spring morning, but nevertheless, I guess they weren't quite prepared for it. Infrastructure is everything, and preparedness. And yeah, if you're used to really hot temperatures and suddenly you got a bunch of snow that falls, your city can be in big trouble real fast. So, what are some of the things that folks can do that live outside of the city limits, perhaps, or maybe even some cities will allow small solar installations or whatnot, or what kind of preparedness outside of perhaps, let's say, solar, some precautions that you can take to assure that you have power in let's say a power outage. Now, the first thing that probably pops into most people's mind is a generator. And generators, I'm not totally against them. But see, you need, for a generator, you need a supply of fuel, a stable supply of fuel that can be on the ready at all times and be there for a significant amount of time. Because the one thing that we saw in California was there was a real fuel shortage, and people who had generators didn't have the fuel to run them. And so, and the food in their freezer was spoiling. And so all the preparedness that they had put into food was all gone. And so people weren't necessarily running out of food. They were just running out of power. And it was interesting because even the supermarket, in one particular town, I think it was Vacaville, I believe, but they were actually giving their food away because it was spoiling. They had no way to keep it cool. And so, and very quickly, stores run out of food as well. And with no power, of course, you can't pump gas, like I said. But so, a good stable fuel supply would be something like maybe propane. If you had like a 250 gallon tank, even if your house didn't run on propane, actually that would be ideal because you're not going to use it. You just have it sitting there on a standby. And, you can pick these tanks up for pretty cheap. I've got a 500 gallon tank that I picked up for $100 actually, off of an estate sale. And the guy delivered it for another $100. And so for $200, I got myself a 500 gallon tank. And that's just my backup tank. I have an additional tank that I actually found at the scrapyard. And me and John, we just put all new valves. We found 2 tanks out there, and we just put new valves on there and a new top, and we're good to go. But I guess my point is the stable fuel supply. So if you had at least a year's supply for your generator, and even maybe 2 generators, because what do they say? 1 is none, 2 is 1. All right, I didn't understand what that meant at first until you got to think about it. When you only have 1 of something, there's always the chance that that one thing you're gonna lose it, you're gonna break it, it's gonna wear out, whatever, and then you have nothing. So redundancy. And I'm not saying people should go crazy with this, but you can get over obsessed with preparing. We've all watched the shows Preppers. Well, maybe not all of us, but some of us do, and some of those people get pretty carried away with their prepping, and some people just they focus mainly on just the food part of the prepping. Others will focus upon the weapons and the tactics of the zombie apocalypse and all that stuff. But we have to be reasonable. And what is the most likely scenario? Well, we know a very likely scenario is the loss of power. And, Off Grid 406, that's what my channel is all about, is how to make power from being off grid. But nobody says that you can't have a small off-grid system attached to your house that's on grid, right? I mean, doesn't that make sense? So you're on the grid, you have power from the city, but then on the side you have a little solar system or wind or whatever suits you the best, and you have a little battery bank. It doesn't have to be little, it doesn't have to be big, but whatever you can afford, and an inverter. And for those who can't do that sort of thing, perhaps a generator and a fuel supply. That's something you can do almost anywhere. Even if you had to buy a few of those, I don't know, what are they, like the 100-pound cylinders? 100 pounds or 200 pounds? I don't know. They come up to right about my neck or so. They're about 5 feet, tall. Buy a couple of those. They're for sale at farm supply stores. And fill those things up. And that gives you at least a couple months supply for your generator. You know what I'm saying? And maybe even cooking, because that can be a big problem too. If you're tied to the grid and your stove is electric, all of a sudden you can't cook. You can't cook and all the food is spoiling in your refrigerator. You see how that can be a big problem? And yeah, you've got a barbecue in the backyard, but suddenly food is not available either. And so, I'm just saying, a little bit of thought, like for us, we store food. I don't like to store a lot of food in the freezer. But you can stay alive for a long, long time on just beans and rice, and you can vacuum pack them, or you can put them in one of those Mylar bags with an oxygen absorber. Boom. You got yourself something that'll sit there for 10 years, if need be, at the ready, in case you need it. And beans and rice will go a long, long ways. Let's say you have 100 pounds of beans and 100 pounds of rice. What does that cost? Maybe $100. You see what I'm saying? Maybe another $100 for the storage containers and all the stuff to actually store it. And you could just tuck that underneath the house and it's ready to go. And the same thing's true with the generator. If every household had just a few months worth of food and a generator and a few months worth of fuel, like nobody would be in crisis mode when these things take place. And I won't even get into how to survive in a flood zone, because I wouldn't know. Because in the first place, I don't know. How do people get in those situations in the first place? I've always wondered. You build a house right on Hurricane Alley. I guess the property's cheap, right? Or you build in the flood zone for this same reason. But I digress. Anyways, folks, I just wanted to encourage you to take the steps necessary to make sure that your family is safe in time of trouble. And it doesn't really take that much. It just takes a small amount of forethought. Yeah, what else is there to say? Anyways, folks, if you find any of my content interesting or useful in the least, I'd appreciate that thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. And, we'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.